Welcome to Deep Sleep Storyteller, where every night we come home to the quietest, warmest corners of memory and rest there until morning finds us. Tonight, we go somewhere very tender, very still, very safe. We go back to 1996, to a 17-year-old boy sitting at a desk in his bedroom late at night, writing words he was never quite brave enough to send to a girl named Monika. And we return to those words now, through the eyes of the man he became, reading them gently, without regret, without sadness, only with the soft and grateful wonder of someone who remembers what it felt like to love something quietly and keep it just for himself. Close your eyes now. Let your body grow heavy and warm, and let this story carry you all the way back and all the way down into the deepest, most peaceful rest. There is a shoebox on the bed. It has been on the bed for about 20 minutes now, just sitting there, slightly dented at one corner, its lid not quite perfectly aligned with its base the way it never was even when it was new. The cardboard gone soft with age and faintly rippled in one spot, as though it got slightly damp once, years ago, and dried again without anyone noticing. It is not a remarkable box in any way. It is simply a shoebox, the kind that used to hold a pair of trainers. The brand name long since faded to near illegibility on the side. The original tissue paper inside replaced long ago with a folded piece of old flannel shirt that someone once thought would make a better lining for the things inside it. The things inside it are letters, a small stack of them, not big, maybe 15 or 20 pages in total, folded in the careful and slightly self-conscious way that a 17-year-old boy folds paper when he wants it to look as though he has not thought too much about how it looks. They are written in blue ballpoint pen on the kind of lined paper that came from a spiral-bound notebook, the left edge slightly ragged where the pages were torn out, and the handwriting on them is recognizable and yet not quite familiar. The handwriting of the same hand that writes now but younger, less settled in its habits, the letters slightly larger and more deliberate, the pressure slightly heavier, the way handwriting is when you're still thinking about each word as you write it, rather than letting the words come through the hand without interruption. The man holding one of these letters is 46 years old, and his name, if you need a name for him, is the same name he has always had, though it sits differently on him now than it did in 1996 when the letter was written. He is sitting on the edge of his bed in a room that is quiet and dim, a lamp on the nightstand giving just enough light to read by, a soft yellow glow that falls across the page in his hands and across his face and leaves everything beyond the circle of the bed in comfortable shadow. It is late, past 11, perhaps closer to midnight, the kind of hour when everything unnecessary has already happened, and what remains is the last and truest version of the day. The hour that belongs to nobody's demands and nothing scheduled. The hour that is simply yours. He found the shoebox this evening while looking for something else entirely, as one always finds the things that matter most by accident in the process of looking for something far more ordinary. He had been in the back of the wardrobe, the deep part where things accumulate over years without quite being forgotten or quite being used, and his hand had encountered the box on a high shelf behind a stack of folded jumpers, and he had known immediately what it was even before he brought it down. Known from the weight and the size and the slightly soft feel of the old cardboard, the particular combination of sensory details that the body recognizes before the mind catches up with it. He had carried it to the bed and set it there, and then stood looking at it for a moment with his hands in his pockets, not with any great drama or significance, simply with the mild and pleasant anticipation of someone who has come across something they thought they had lost and finds that the finding of it is a warm rather than a painful thing, a gentle surprise rather than a difficult one. Then he had lifted the lid and found the letters exactly as he had left them, exactly as he had folded and arranged them in the box more than 25 years ago. The flannel shirt cloth still wrapped around them, still faintly soft. The blue ink on the topmost page still legible, and the handwriting still immediately recognizable as his own, and yet belonging to someone who feels, in some ways, like a younger brother rather than a former self, someone he is fond of and well disposed toward, someone he is glad to have been. The letter he is holding now is the first one, dated in the top right corner in the manner he had been taught at school, the date written out in that particular way. That was the convention then, the day, and the month, and the year are arranged just so. And the year is 1996, which places it neatly in the middle of a decade that he remembers with the particular quality of warmth that attaches itself to the years of late adolescence. When you look back on them from a sufficient distance, the warmth of a time that was not always easy and not always happy, but that had a particular texture and quality of feeling that was entirely its own, and that no other period of life has quite replicated. You read slowly. There is no hurry. There is nowhere to be and nothing to do, and the night is long and quiet around him. A lamp is warm on the page, and the words, when they come in the voice of someone he has not heard from in a very long time, and whose voice turns out to be more familiar than he expected, more like his own voice than he remembered, just younger, just less worn in by time, just a little more tentative in the way that young voices are tentative, feeling their way toward what they mean rather than arriving there with the ease of long practice. The letter begins, as all the letters in the box begin, with the same word, simply her name, written without any salutation or greeting, just the name alone at the top of the page after the date, as though the name itself is enough, as though writing it is already most of what needs to be done, as though the act of putting her name on paper is the whole point, and everything that follows is simply the elaboration of that single irreducible fact. Monika, he had written, and then a space of perhaps 3 lines on the page before the next words began, a space that represents a pause he can still almost feel even now, the pause of a 17-year-old boy sitting at his desk in his bedroom that night with a ballpoint pen in his hand and a piece of lined notebook paper in front of him, trying to decide what comes after the name, what it is that he actually wants to say, what words can possibly be equal to the feeling that has been occupying the better part of his waking hours for the past several months and shows no signs of diminishing. The room where those letters were written was a small room at the back of a semi-detached house in a quiet street in a town that was not particularly remarkable in any way, but that was his entire world in 1996 in the way that wherever you are is your entire world at 17. The room had a single bed against one wall, and a desk under the window, and a shelf of books that were arranged in a way that made sense to him then, but whose logic he has since forgotten, and a carpet that was a nondescript shade of oatmeal, and a radiator and made a sound like distant plumbing whenever it came on, which was often in winter, and sometimes inexplicably in summer. The walls were covered with the things that 17-year-old walls are covered with: posters and ticket stubs from concerts, and a map of somewhere he had wanted to go, and a few postcards sent by friends and relations from places more interesting than the quiet street where he lived. The window looked out over the back garden, and then over the fence into the garden next door, and then up to the sky. And in the evenings, when he sat at his desk, the sky went through its slow changes from blue to gray to the particular dark that comes after the streetlights have been on for a while. Not true darkness, but a dark orange tinged urban, almost darkness, that pressed softly against the glass. He had sat at that desk on many evenings in 1996 and written to Monika without sending any of it, and the act of writing had been its own thing, separate from any intention to send, separate from any plan or hope of a particular outcome. He had simply needed to put the words somewhere, to give the feeling a container, to make the interior thing exterior, even if only in ink on paper, even if only in a private document that went straight from his hand to the folded and tucked inside of a spiral notebook and eventually to the flannel cloth inside the shoebox. Monika herself was a girl in his year at school, not in most of his classes, but in two of them, English and history, which meant that he saw her at least twice each day in the formal setting of a classroom, and then additionally, and more importantly, in the informal settings of corridors, the school canteen, and the stretch of pavement outside the school gates, where people gathered at lunch to stand in groups and talk in the way that teenagers at school have always gathered and stood and talked, performing a kind of casual ease that costs considerable effort. She had dark hair that she wore differently from one week to the next, sometimes loose and sometimes in a plait, and sometimes in a high arrangement he could never quite identify the name of. And she had a laugh that he had noticed first before anything else about her, a laugh that was genuinely surprised by things, that came when something actually struck her as funny, rather than when social convention suggested that laughing was appropriate, a laugh that was therefore less frequent than most people's laughs, and therefore more valuable when it came. He had not been friends with her exactly, not in the way that would have given him any ordinary claim on her attention. They spoke when they happened to be near each other, and when speaking was natural, exchanged the ordinary small talk of classmates who are not close, but who have been in the same institutional space long enough to be comfortable with each other's existence, commented on homework and on teachers and on whatever was happening that week in the small social world of the school. It had not been more than that, and he had known it was not more than that, and this knowing had been fine, had been accepted and carried quietly, had not produced in him any great suffering or determination to change things, but simply a steady, low-grade, entirely private awareness of her, that he had grown accustomed to the way you grow accustomed to a sound that is always there in the background of your life, the way it becomes simply part of the atmosphere of your days. He looks at the first letter again, this 46-year-old man, sitting on the edge of his bed in the lamplight, and he reads the words that the 17-year-old wrote after that 3-line pause following her name. And the words are these: "I don't know why I'm writing this down, because I'm definitely not going to send it. I think I just need somewhere to put it. You sat in front of me in English today, and you were reading before Mrs. Hargreaves came in, and you were completely somewhere else, somewhere inside the book. And I kept thinking that I'd like to know where that was. Not in a weird way, just that it seemed like a good place to be, and I wish I could have been there too." The man on the bed reads this and feels something that is not sadness and not quite happiness, but something that sits between them, or perhaps beneath them, something quieter than either. The feeling you get when you recognize something true from a great distance, when you find evidence that you were, once, paying exactly the right kind of attention to exactly the right kind of thing, even if you didn't quite know what to do with it at the time. He sets the first letter down on the bed beside the shoebox and picks up the second one, which is dated a few weeks later. And already in the interval between the two letters, the handwriting has settled slightly, has grown a little more comfortable with the enterprise of writing to someone you are not going to send the letter to, has relaxed into itself the way you relax into any private practice once you have established that it is safe and no one is requiring it to be anything other than what it is. The second letter is longer than the first. It begins with the same word, her name, and then it moves into something that is more like an account of a particular afternoon, written in the careful observational way of someone who has noticed that writing things down is a way of keeping them, of rescuing them from the ordinary forgetting that takes most of the days of most of our lives and never gives them back. He had written about a Wednesday afternoon in October, which he remembered for reasons that had nothing to do with any significant event, and everything to do with the accumulation of small sensory details that had added up to something he could not name, but knew wanted to remember. He had written, "It was raining when school ended today. That kind of rain that isn't quite heavy enough to justify an umbrella, but is definitely heavy enough to make everything uncomfortable. And most people were standing under the overhang by the main door, trying to decide whether to make a run for it or wait it out. You were standing near the edge of the group with your bag over one shoulder, and you had a paperback in your other hand, and after maybe a minute, you just walked out into it. You didn't run, you just walked, and I stood under the overhang watching you go, and I thought you were absolutely right to do it, that there was something exactly right about not waiting, about just accepting that it was raining and walking anyway. And I think I stood there for another couple of minutes after you'd gone thinking about that. I still am, if I'm honest." He sets the second letter on top of the first and reaches for the third, and the night outside his window is very quiet now. A late night quiet that is different from the quiet of earlier evening. Deeper and more settled, the quiet of a neighborhood that has gone fully asleep and is not going to be disturbed again until morning. You can hear, very distantly, the occasional sound of a car on the main road 2 streets away, and once the sound of something, perhaps a cat, moving briefly in the garden below, and then that too is gone, and the quiet resumes its patient occupation of the night. The third letter is from November of 1996, and it is different in tone from the first 2, slightly more confident, as though the letter writing practice has by now established itself as something real, as something he genuinely does rather than something he is trying out, and the confidence shows not in any greater boldness of content, but in the ease of the sentences, the way they move without self-consciousness, the way they seem to have stopped wondering whether they should exist and simply gotten on with existing. He had written about the school library, which was a place he went often, and where he had once looked up from a book to find that she had come in and taken a seat 2 tables away without his having noticed, so that the first he knew of her presence was the sound of a chair being pulled out on the linoleum floor, a sound that he had registered in the way you register sounds in library quiet, with a heightened attention that the ordinary noise of a corridor would never produce. And he had looked up, and there she was, arranging her things on the table with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this many times, getting out her notebook and her pen and the relevant textbook, and then sitting very still for a moment before beginning, in the way that he himself often sat for a moment before beginning, that small pause at the threshold of a task that is partly preparation and partly something more like acknowledgement, like marking the moment of starting as distinct from the moment before it. He had written, "I don't think you knew I was there. You were very focused. You had that expression you get when you're concentrating, which I know is a strange thing to notice about someone who isn't your friend exactly, but I'm the one who sits behind you in 2 classes, that I've had a lot of opportunity to see the back of your head and the side of your face when you're thinking about something, and I know what your concentrating face looks like. It's very still. Most people's faces move around a lot when they're thinking, but yours goes very still, like the thinking happens somewhere behind the face rather than in it. I don't know why I'm telling you this, Monika. I don't know why I write these things down, except that it seems important to notice them. Like if I don't write it down, I'll lose it. And I don't want to lose it even though I don't know what I would do with it if I had it." The man on the bed puts the 3rd letter down and sits for a moment with his hands in his lap and the shoebox beside him and the small stack of reed letters beside the box. And he thinks about the boy who wrote these things, thinks about him with a gentle and entirely untroubled affection, the way you think about someone you knew a long time ago who was doing their best with what they had and who, in some of the ways that matter most, was doing it rather well. The boy was paying attention. He was writing things down. He was finding a way to hold on to the feeling without demanding that the feeling do anything for him, without requiring it to go anywhere, or become anything or justify its own existence. He was simply feeling it and recording it and keeping it safe in a flannel-lined shoebox, and that, looking back now from the distance of 29 years, seems like one of the wiser things a 17-year-old boy can do with a feeling that is too large for conversation and too private for sharing and too good to simply let dissolve unacknowledged into the ordinary passage of time. The room he is sitting in now is warm and quiet, and the lamp is soft and the letters are in his hands. And outside the window of his current house, on his current street, in his current life, the night is doing what the night always does, deepening and quieting and making the world feel small and manageable and safe in a way that only the deep night can. That particular middle of the night smallness where the world has contracted to the size of a room, and a lamp and a pair of hands holding old paper, and everything beyond that radius is simply the dark, patient, and benign. He picks up the 4th letter, which is longer than the others, written over what appears from the slightly different pressure of the pen to be 2 separate sittings, one beginning and then a break, and then a continuation, the handwriting subtly different between the 2 parts, slightly more tired in the second half, the letters a little less precisely formed, the way handwriting goes when it is very late, and the hand is getting tired, but the mind is still going, and there are still things to say. He had written in this one about a conversation they had actually had, a real conversation, brief and ordinary by any measure, but one that had lodged itself in him with a permanence that surprised him even at the time. It had happened at lunch, on a day in November when he had ended up standing beside her in the queue for the canteen. One of those social accidents of proximity that schools produce constantly. And they had talked for perhaps 4 or 5 minutes about a book that Mrs. Hargreaves had assigned in English, a book he had genuinely liked, and that she had apparently also genuinely liked. And they had discovered this mutual genuineness without either of them performing it, had simply said things about the book that were true, and found that the other person's true things were compatible with their own, and the conversation had been easy in a way that surprised him, easy in a way that felt less like making conversation and more like having it, the difference being the same as the difference between making music and making noise. He had written about this conversation with the particular care of someone who knows they are recording something important, who wants to get the details right, not because the details are factually significant, but because they are the texture of the thing itself, and without them the thing becomes only an outline, a summary, a less than. He had written what she said about the book, and what he had said in response, and what she had said then, and even reading it now, he can feel the faint pressure of those 5 minutes in the canteen queue, the particular kind of attention he had been paying, the particular quality of listening that you do when you are listening to someone you are very interested in. You want to hear not just the words, but the way the words are chosen, the pauses between them, the places where someone searches for exactly the right thing to say and finds it or doesn't find it and says the next best thing instead. He had written at the end of this account of the conversation, I kept trying to think of a reason to make it last longer, but the queue moved and we got to the front, and that was it. We got our lunch and went to different tables, and the whole thing was over in the normal way that ordinary things are over, and I sat with my lunch and thought about it for the rest of the period and probably for most of the afternoon, indefinitely, until quite late at night, which is when I'm writing this down, so I won't have to stop thinking about it. Is that strange, Monika? I don't think you'd find it strange. I think you'd understand why a person would want to keep something that felt like that. I think you're the kind of person who keeps things. The man on the bed folds this letter along its original creases and adds it to the small pile and reaches for the 5th one. As he does so, he becomes aware of the quality of the night around him, the particular stillness of a house at midnight, the way all the sounds of the day have finally subsided, and what remains is the building's own quiet breathing, the small sounds that structures make when they are unoccupied and unstimulated, the occasional infinitesimal tick or creak of wood in plaster adjusting to temperature, the almost inaudible hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the distant sound of his own clock on the nightstand, marking the passing of each second in its small and patient way. These sounds are very comforting in the way that familiar background sounds always are comforting, the way they tell you without words that you are in your own place, that the night is proceeding normally, that everything is as it should be and nothing requires your attention. He lets them in, these small sounds of his own house at midnight, and they mix pleasantly with the feeling of the letters in his hands and the lamplight on the page. and the general quality of the evening, which has become something he did not quite expect when he found the shoebox, something warmer and more nourishing than he anticipated, as though the 17-year-old boy in the letters has been waiting a long time for someone to come back and read them with the kind of patient and appreciative attention they always deserved. The fifth letter is shorter than the others, barely half a page, written in what might be December given the reference in it to the cold, and to the particular quality of December light in the late afternoons when school ends, and it is already almost dark outside. That strange, compressed feeling of December days, when the light comes and goes so quickly that you feel you have barely been awake before it is already dusk again. He had written in this one about nothing in particular, and everything in particular, which is to say he had written about standing at the window of his bedroom one evening, looking out at the back garden in the December dusk, the garden going gray and formless in the fading light, the fence at the bottom just visible, and beyond it the orange glow of the sky above the rooftops of the houses in the next street, and thinking about Monika, not in any specific way, but simply being aware of her as a fact of the world, the way you are aware of certain things in the background of your consciousness without actively thinking about them, the way the awareness of them has become part of the texture of being alive. He had written, "Sometimes I think the feeling is like a radio playing in another room. You can't quite make out the words, but you know the music is there, and you know you like it. That's what it's like knowing you exist, and not really knowing you at all, like hearing music from another room. I don't know if that's sad or just accurate. I think it's just accurate. I think some things are like that, and that's okay." He reads this and is quietly moved by it. Moved not to tears or to any strong emotion, but to the particular still feeling you get when you encounter something true that was made by someone doing their honest best with the materials they had. The feeling of recognition. That is also the feeling of respect. The 17-year-old boy had been right. It had been like music from another room. And he had been right also that this was okay, that there was nothing tragic in it, that it was simply the accurate description of a particular experience that many people have, and that does not require resolution to be valid, to be real, to be worth writing down and keeping in a flannel-lined shoebox on a high shelf in the back of a wardrobe for 29 years. He sets the fifth letter on the pile and lifts the sixth, and the night around him seems to have deepened another degree, to have grown even quieter, which he would not have thought possible given how quiet it already was. But the night has its own depths, and keeps finding them, keeps descending through one floor of quiet into another below it, each one softer and stiller than the last. Each one further from the world's noise, and closer to the pure silence that lives at the bottom of all deep nights. His body is relaxed in a particular way that comes from being still for a long time while doing something that requires only the gentlest attention, the attention of reading, of receiving rather than producing, of simply following something at the pace it sets rather than driving the pace yourself. His back is settled against the headboard now. He has shifted without noticing into a more fully reclining position, the pillow behind him soft and familiar, the weight of the old duvet across his legs warm and heavy in the good way, in the way that makes the body feel held rather than burdened. The sixth letter is one of the longer ones again, written on what appears to have been a weekend, given the absence of any school reference and the different quality of the writing. Slightly less careful, slightly more expansive, as though the open time of a weekend morning had given the words more room to move. He had written about something he had been reading, a novel, and about a particular passage in the novel that had struck him as true. A passage about how the people we love at a distance become in some ways more fully imagined than the people we are close to, because the distance forces us to fill in the gaps with our own understanding and attention, so that the person we love at a distance is partly them and partly the very best version of ourselves that we can manage, our most perceptive and our most generous, and our most willing to believe in the fundamental goodness of another person projected outward and called by their name. He had written, "I read that, and I thought about you, Monika, and I think it might be true, but I also think it's okay. And I don't think it means the feeling is not real. I think it's just a different kind of real. The kind of real that exists inside a person rather than between two people. Like how a piece of music is real even if you're the only one who hears it. Even if you hear it only once, it's still real. It happened. You can't unhappen it just because nobody else was there." He pauses here, on the bed in the lamplight at midnight in 2025, with this letter from 1996 in his hands. And he stays with that last sentence for a moment, letting it be there in the quiet room, letting it settle into the air the way something settles when it has been said that is simply and undeniably true. You can't unhappen it just because nobody else was there. He thinks about all the things in his life that have happened and been real and been genuinely felt, that existed only inside him, only in his private awareness, only in the letters he never sent, and the feelings he never spoke aloud, and the small quiet loves that were never shared, and therefore never tested, and never disappointed, and never complicated by the difficult, ordinary business of being known by another person and knowing them in return. He thinks about this without sadness, which is the important thing, which is the thing that surprises him slightly even now, that he can hold these old letters and these old feelings. This memory of a girl called Monika who sat in front of him in English and walked out into the rain without waiting, and had a concentrating face that went very still and said true things about books and canteen cues, and feel nothing that resembles grief or regret, only this warm and steady and thoroughly comfortable thing that is perhaps what nostalgia feels like when it has been allowed enough time and enough distance to become pure, to lose all its bitterness, and become only the sweetness, only the preserved quality of something that was good, and is still good in memory, and does not need to have been anything other than what it was. The seventh letter is dated in January of 1997, which means that by then the practice of writing to Monika had continued across the turn of the year, and made it through the Christmas holiday, and come out the other side still going, which says something about the persistence of the feeling, and something also about the persistence of the practice. The way that private writing, once established, takes on its own momentum, becomes its own need, becomes the way a person processes their interior life in the same way that other people process it through talking or through exercise or through music. He had written in this one about the new year and about how strange it felt, not in a dramatic way, but in the small particular way that any transition feels strange, the slight discontinuity of being the same person in a new context, of carrying the same feelings from the old year, into the new one where they must introduce themselves again to a world that has technically changed its name, even though it is otherwise identical to the world of 24 hours ago. He had written about sitting in his bedroom on New Year's Day and thinking about the year ahead, which would be the year of his A-levels, the year of finishing school, the year after which everything would change and disperse in the way that everything changes and disperses at the end of school, everyone going off in their different directions, everyone becoming part of other worlds, the world of the school becoming a former world, a place that had been and would now be remembered rather than lived. He had written, "I keep thinking about what it will be like when school is over and we all go different places, not with dread exactly, more with awareness. I think, like knowing that something good is finite doesn't make it less good. It just makes you pay more attention to it while it's still happening. That's what this year feels like to me already, like something worth paying attention to while it's still there to pay attention to, including you, Monika, especially you, the man reading this smiles, very slightly in the lamplight. Not a large smile, not a demonstrative one, but the small involuntary upward movement at the corners of the mouth that happens when you recognize something kind, something that has the quality of genuine goodness about it. The boy had been paying attention, which is perhaps the most important thing a person can do, paying attention and writing it down, making the interior world visible to itself even if to no one else, giving the feelings the dignity of articulation even in a private document that would never be sent. He had done it for the whole of that year, the year of levels and endings, and the letters in the box are the evidence of it. This stack of folded pages and blue ballpoint pen on lined notebook paper, this private record of a private feeling that never asked to become anything else and that has survived 29 years in a flannel-lined shoebox to be read now in a quiet bedroom at midnight by the person who wrote it, who is also in some deep and continuous way the same person who wrote it, who can trace the line between the 17-year-old at the desk and the 46-year-old on the bed without any break in the continuity, feeling the sameness underneath the difference, the way you feel the sameness of a river by standing on its bank long enough to see that it is always moving and always there. He reaches for the 8th letter, and the pile grows smaller, and the night grows quieter, and the lamp is warm on the page, and the room is warm around him, and the house is still, and the street beyond the house is still, and the whole sleeping neighborhood is still, layered in its ordinary nighttime quiet, the quiet of people asleep in their own beds and their own rooms, with their own private collections of things that were felt and kept, and never quite sent. The 8th letter is about spring, which means it was written perhaps in April or May, and spring in a letter from a 17-year-old in 1996 has a quality that spring always has in that particular period of life, the quality of everything being new and possible in a way that will never be quite so absolutely new and possible again. Not because life becomes less good, but because it becomes more complex, more qualified, more aware of its own conditions and limitations. And that absolute first experience newness is a thing of early life that cannot be recovered later, only remembered with a mix of gratitude and tenderness that is the best that can be done with things that cannot be recovered. He had written about a day in May when the school had some kind of outdoor event, a sports day. or a fate of some kind, and he had spent most of it moving around the edges of things in his particular way, observing more than participating, which he recognized even then as his natural mode, and did not apologize for in the letter, simply described as the way he was. The way the particular awareness he carried required a certain amount of watching rather than doing, a certain amount of standing slightly apart from the center of activity and letting the activity come to him in the form of sensory impression rather than direct engagement. He had written about seeing Monika at this event in a different context from school, in the bright outdoor light, in a summer dress rather than the school uniform he was accustomed to, and about the way this small change of context had made her seem both more familiar and more entirely herself, as though the removal of the institutional setting had allowed something more genuinely her to be present, had removed one layer of the ordinary context that surrounds people in institutional spaces, and left something slightly more unmediated in its place. He had written about watching her laugh with her friends across the field, that laugh that was always genuinely surprised rather than performed, and about thinking that he would carry this image for a long time. The May afternoon light on the school field and her laughing in it with her hair loose, and he had been right about that, because here it is, all these years later, still in the letter, still vivid enough to transmit across the distance of nearly 3 decades to the man on the bed, who reads it and finds it there, intact and bright as something kept in the dark is sometimes more perfectly preserved than something left out in the light. He reads the letter about the May afternoon and then folds it carefully along its old creases, and sets it on the pile, and sits for a moment in the warm quiet of midnight with his hands resting open in his lap and his head tipped back very slightly against the headboard, breathing slowly and without effort, the way you breathe when you are deeply relaxed and the body has remembered its own wisdom about rest. He thinks about Monika as she was then, and finds that the thought is entirely gentle, entirely without complication. She has been in his memory for 29 years as that girl, the one from English and history, the one who walked out into the rain without waiting, the one who had a laugh that was genuinely surprised, and she has remained exactly that, has not been revised or updated or complicated by any further information, has stayed simply as she was in those letters, vivid and specific, and entirely herself in the way that only people who are seen with genuine attention and without agenda tend to be vivid and specific, because the seeing was not trying to make her into anything, not trying to fit her into any story or serve any need, but was simply paying attention, simply finding her interesting and good and worth the careful record of a private letter that would never be sent. He wonders very briefly, and without much investment, whether she is still somewhere in the world, whether she went on from that May afternoon, that English classroom, and the canteen queue to a whole life that he knows nothing about, which she almost certainly did, because that is what people do. They go on. They go forward into the life that is waiting for them. They become their own story, which is entirely separate from anyone else's story of them. He thinks this is good and right, and exactly as it should be, that she went on into her own life, and he went on into his, and that somewhere in the gap between those two lives is this, the letters, the flannel-lined shoebox, the private, and entirely undemanding record of a feeling that was real and good, and did not need to be reciprocated to be worth feeling, did not need to be sent to be worth writing, did not need to become anything else to justify its own existence. The ninth letter is the one he has been slightly aware of as he worked through the stack. The longest one, the one that fills more pages than any of the others, written in a hand that is tired and slightly hurried in places, and then more careful in others. The handwriting of someone who wrote for a long time in one sitting, and then went back and read it, and added things. The additions visible in slightly smaller writing that fits itself into the margins and between lines already written. It is dated in June of 1997, which means it was written very close to the end of school, very close to the end of the world in which the letters were possible, the world of daily proximity and canteen queues and library afternoons, and the particular accumulated familiarity of people who have been in the same institutional space for long enough that their presences have become woven into the background of each other's days. He unfolds this letter carefully. It is longer and requires more unfolding than the others, and the paper is slightly more worn at the fold lines, as though it was folded and unfolded more than once, as though even at the time of writing it was handled more, returned to more, carried around perhaps before finally being placed in the box. He begins reading, and the letter opens like this. Monika, it's the last week of school. Everything feels like the last time. The last Tuesday, the last Wednesday, the last lunch in the canteen, the last time I'll have a reason to be in the building every day, where you also are every day. I keep thinking I should say something, and then I keep thinking I won't, and I think I won't, and I think that's probably right, and I think I'm okay with it being right, but I wanted to write it down because I want to remember how this feels, how the last week of something feels when it contains something you've been carrying quietly for almost a year, and you know the carrying is about to change. Not stop, but change. Become a different kind of carrying. The kind where the thing you're carrying is a memory rather than a present fact. He reads slowly. The man on the bed in the midnight lamplight reads this letter that is the longest and the last, and the night around him is so quiet that the sound of the paper is audible. When he turns it over, that dry and gentle sound of old paper, and the lamp is warm on the page, and his breathing is very slow, and the letter is in his hands, and the years between then and now feel both very long and entirely insubstantial, feel like something that can be folded up and set aside the way the letters themselves can be folded and set aside, leaving only the essential thing, which is the feeling, which is the record, which is the evidence that a 17-year-old boy in a small bedroom in 1996 was paying exactly the right kind of attention to the world he was living in and finding it genuinely and specifically beautiful and worth the careful, private, and entirely unsent record of a blue ballpoint pen on lined notebook paper. The letter continues for several more pages. The last letter in the box, the one written in the last week of school, and it is in many ways the fullest of all of them. The one where the 17-year-old seems most fully himself, most settled in the practice of writing, most comfortable with what he is doing and why, least self-conscious about the strangeness of writing letters you never intend to send, most at peace with the feeling itself and its particular form and its particular requirements. He had written about the English class they shared, the last one, Mrs. Hargreaves apparently reading to them at the end of the last lesson from a poem that he does not name, but that he quotes a few lines of in the letter. Lines about time and memory and the way things persist in the interior world long after they have ceased to exist in the exterior one, and about how he had sat in that last English class and listened to the poem, and thought about the year, and about her, and about the particular quality of this kind of love, the private kind, the kept kind, the kind that never became a conversation, or a complication, or a disappointment, but simply remained what it had always been, a steady, quiet awareness of another person's particular way of being in the world, carried privately and without demand, and set down eventually in letters that would go into a box and onto a high shelf and stay there for a long time, longer than the school that produced them, longer than the specific small world in which they were possible. He had written at the very end of this last letter, "I don't think I'll regret not saying anything. I think some feelings are for keeping rather than spending. Like you keep some things safe because they're too good to risk in the ordinary weather of the world. I kept this one. I put it here in these letters, and I'll put the letters somewhere. And maybe sometime a long time from now, I'll find them and read them and think about you, Monika, and about this year, and about how it felt to be 17, paying attention. And I think when that time comes, I'll feel okay about it. I think I'll feel lucky. I think I'll be glad I wrote it down." The man on the bed puts the letter down very slowly and sits in the quiet of midnight with his hands in his lap and the pile of letters beside him and the empty shoebox beside the pile, and the lamp is warm on everything, and the night is very quiet outside, and he breathes in and out with the deep and easy rhythm of someone who is entirely at rest, entirely at peace, entirely, and without reservation glad to be where he is. He had been right. The 17-year-old had been exactly right. He feels lucky. He is glad it was written down. He is glad the shoebox was on the high shelf in the back of the wardrobe, and that he was looking for something else entirely, and found it instead, as you will always find the things that matter most by accident in the process of looking for something more ordinary. He's glad for Monika, and the May afternoon, and the canteen queue, and the English classroom, and the library, and the rain she walked out into without waiting. And he is glad for the letters, and for the private and particular love they record, which was real, and is still real, which was good, and is still good, which happened, and which cannot be unhappened by the fact that nobody else was there. He stacks the letters carefully, in the order he read them, and folds them back into their original shapes, and wraps the flannel cloth around them the way it was before, and sets them gently into the box, and places the lid on the box, and sets the box on the nightstand beside the lamp. And then he lies down, this 46-year-old man in his quiet house at midnight in 2025, and pulls the duvet up to his shoulder and lets his eyes close. And the lamp is still on, but its warmth is behind his closed eyelids now. Just warmth, just color, just the gentle presence of light that is not intrusive, that simply exists. He thinks of a May afternoon in 1996. Outdoor light on a school field, a girl laughing with her friends. Genuinely surprised laughter, hair loose in the May warmth. The particular quality of that light, which was the light of being 17 the last weeks of the world as it was then, before it became the next world, and then the one after that, and then this one, the one in which a middle-aged man finds old letters in a shoebox and reads them quietly at midnight, and puts them back carefully and lies down and feels, without any ambiguity and without any reservation. Lucky, the night receives him gently, the way the night always receives the people who come to it having set their things down, having done what they needed to do with the day, having arrived at the last and quietest hour, having released what needed releasing and kept what needed keeping. The dark is warm rather than cold, the familiar dark of a room you know and trust, the dark of home, the dark of rest. His breathing slows further still, the space between breaths lengthening pleasantly, the body finding its own rhythm now that the mind has let it, settling into the deep and reliable pattern of genuine sleep approaching, of the day finally and completely finished, of everything attended to, and everything set down, and nothing remaining to be done except this breathing, this warmth, this gradual and entirely welcome dissolution of waking into sleeping. Somewhere in the transition between the two, he thinks of the boy at the desk, the blue pen in his hand, the lined paper, the lamp on in the bedroom at the back of the house, while the night pressed softly against the window, the name written at the top of the page, and then the pause, and then the words beginning, careful and honest and private and entirely his own. And he feels for that boy what the boy could not have felt for himself at the time, but what the years have been slowly building toward. A simple and uncomplicated pride, a simple and uncomplicated gratitude, the feeling of a person who looks back at who they were and finds that who they were was trying, genuinely, and with the best of themselves, to be present in their own life, to pay attention, to notice the beautiful things, and write them down, to keep what was worth keeping, to carry quietly what was too good to spend in the ordinary weather of the world. The shoebox is on the nightstand. The lamp is warm. The night is quiet. The house is still. The letters are folded and wrapped and safe in their flannel, and the feeling they contain is as real now as it was when the ink was wet, as present now as it was when the boy sat at his desk in 1996 and wrote a name at the top of a page and paused and then continued. Sleep comes now, gently, without announcement, the way sleep always comes to someone who has made peace with the day and the night and the years and the things that were felt and kept and never sent. It comes the way memory comes at its best, without demand, without urgency, simply present, simply there, simply warm. You are safe. You are warm. You are held in the quiet dark of your own life, your own night, your own particular and unrepeatable history of small private feelings and kept things and letters that went into boxes and stayed there, patient and preserved and waiting to be found again when the time was right. Rest now. Let the night hold you. Let the lamp dim in your awareness. Let the shoebox be there on the nightstand as it will be there in the morning. A small and ordinary thing containing something that is not ordinary at all. Something that has waited patiently and will go on being there. Let your breathing be the only thing. In and out. Slow and slower still. And the night is very long and very quiet and entirely entirely kind. Sleep gently, deeply, and carry with you into the dark only this: the feeling of something real and good and privately and beautifully kept, something that was written down, something that was loved, something that remains. Sleep now. Sleep. You are home. You are safe. You are at rest. And the letters are in the box. And the box is on the shelf. And the night goes on and on and on in its patient and generous way. And everything is exactly as it should be. Exactly as it should be.